Have you ever had one of those days when everything feels heavy, like the whole world is conspiring to test your patience? Well, that was exactly one of those days for me. The sky over Denver was gray, and the cold wind cut like a razor. I remember looking out my kitchen window, watching the dry leaves swirling on the sidewalk, and thinking, just another day, just like all the others. But I had no idea that that would be the day the past would come back to look me in the eyes. My name was Margaret Collins. I was 68 years old, and my life, on the outside, seemed perfect. A beautiful house, a new car, friends from church. But inside, there was an emptiness that not even the most fervent prayers could fill. It was as if something, or someone, had been left behind. That silent hole in the chest that we try to ignore, but it insists on hurting on the coldest nights. Before continuing, I want to say that I ask God to bless you with all His infinite love, giving you much health, peace, joy, and faith, because we can never lose faith in God, for He will never abandon us, because His love is eternal and infinite. I also take this opportunity to ask you to like the video and subscribe to the channel. This helps me a lot, thank you. Now, let me tell you what happened that day, because what I experienced changed everything I believed about forgiveness and destiny. That morning, I rushed out of the house. The coffee was still steaming in the mug, but the clock on the wall already showed I was late. I had an important meeting downtown, something about the sale of an old family property. I didn't want to go, but I had to. I put on my navy blue wool coat, the same one I wore when I wanted to appear more composed than I actually was, and left. Traffic in Denver was chaotic. Horns blaring, sirens blaring, and a bone-chilling cold. I always parked on the same block, near a bakery where I bought a creamy cappuccino every morning. It was my little ritual. I believed that hot coffee was what kept me going, when in reality it was just a mask for my loneliness. While waiting for my order, I noticed a man sitting across the street. Long beard, dirty clothes, trembling hands holding a crumpled paper cup. He was looking at the ground, but there was something different about him. He wasn't just a beggar. There was a strange dignity in his posture, a lost but still human look in his eyes. I turned my face away. I didn't want to look at it. But fate doesn't accept being ignored. As soon as I left the bakery, cappuccino in hand, he approached. "Ma'am, could you help me with something to eat?" he said in a hoarse but soft voice. I didn't even look at him properly. I felt a pang of irritation, perhaps more with myself than with him. I replied coldly, almost automatically, "Work like everyone else." He lowered his head, and for a second, just a second, I felt something different. An unease, a memory I couldn't identify. But I shook my head and kept walking, hurrying, trying to leave that image behind. I didn't know that small gesture would come back to haunt me. The rest of the morning dragged on. Meetings, calls, paperwork, everything seemed colorless. And yet, from time to time, the image of that man returned to my mind. Those tired eyes, that gaze that seemed to pierce through me. I tried to push the thought away, telling myself he was just another stranger, someone life had left behind. When I left the building, the sun was already setting. The city was golden, but cold. Car lights reflected off the windows, and people hurried past, each trapped in their own world. And then, the unexpected happened. I felt a tightness in my chest, strong, as if an invisible hand were pulling me inside myself. I tried to breathe, but no air came. My legs gave way, the ground seemed to spin. I remember seeing the cappuccino fall from my hand, scattering across the sidewalk as if time had stopped for an instant. And, before everything went dark, I heard a voice. The same hoarse, distressed voice, saying, "Please, someone call for help." I woke up to the distant sound of monitors and the smell of a hospital. The bright white light blinded me. I didn't know where I was, or how much time had passed. Gradually, everything came back, the cold, the collapse, that man's face. I tried to sit up, but a nurse appeared quickly. "Calm down, Mrs. Collins. You fainted in the street. They brought you here. They brought you here." I repeated, confused. "Who?" She smiled slightly. "A man. He stayed here until he was sure you were all right. He said he needed to go, but he left this for you." She held out a folded piece of paper. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. 3 words written in shaky handwriting: "Forgive me, Margaret." My heart stopped for a moment. I didn't remember saying my name. How could that man know who I was? I stood there, staring at the note as if it were a key that opened a door I didn't know if I wanted to go through. Something inside me told me that this wasn't a coincidence. I spent the night awake, staring at the paper. Memories began to come in waves, a childhood marked by an absent love, by unanswered questions, by a face I hadn't seen in 20 years. A face that, for a moment, I swore I recognized on that sidewalk. The next morning, I left the hospital with a heavy heart. The city seemed different, quieter. I knew what I needed to do, even without understanding why. I got in the car and drove back to that same block. I wanted to find him. I wanted to look him in the eyes and ask him who he was. But he was no longer there. Only the crumpled glass, fallen on the floor, and the distant echo of a story that was about to reopen. A story I've spent my life trying to forget. It was there, on that cold and silent corner, that the past began to call me back. I just didn't know that the call would come from the voice of the man I once called father. And that's how it all began. That following morning, I couldn't get that man's face out of my head. The sidewalk on Main Street looked exactly the same, but there was a different weight in the air, as if the wind itself carried memories. I looked in every corner, hoping he would suddenly appear, with that sad, calm look. But nothing. Only silence and regret hammering in my chest. I went back into the bakery, trying to find some clue. The clerk, a short-haired girl named Lisa, recognized me immediately. "You're the one who fainted yesterday, aren't you? The man who helped you was an angel." She spoke with a smile, but my heart sank. Angel. What irony. I asked if she knew who he was. Lisa shook her head thoughtfully. He would sometimes come by to ask for coffee, but he never accepted money. He said he'd had everything in life and lost what was essential. Her words kept echoing in my mind. Having had everything in life and lost what was essential. I left there with a lump in my throat. Every step along the sidewalk felt like a confession. How could I have treated him that way? Why was I so cruel? Guilt burned, and the memory of the note, "Forgive me, Margaret," haunted me. I knew that plea for forgiveness hid something much deeper. I decided to go to the municipal shelter. It was the only place where homeless people could find refuge from the cold in Denver. The smell of soup and old blankets hit me as soon as I walked in. A friendly volunteer greeted me, but her expression changed when she heard my description of the man. "Ah, Mr. Thomas. He hasn't been here for days. He was always quiet, polite. He used to read an old Bible every morning, sitting in the corner." Thomas. The name sounded familiar, but I couldn't understand why. I thanked her, but before leaving, she added, "He talked a lot about a daughter. He said the biggest mistake of his life was leaving her without explanation." My whole body trembled. A daughter? Could it be a coincidence? My heart started beating faster. I went to the car trying to think, but the memory of that scar on his face, the way he pronounced my name, something didn't add up. It was as if God was taking me back to a point I never wanted to revisit. That night, I sat in the living room armchair, the note still in my hands. I thought about throwing it away, but I couldn't. Something inside me said, "Look for him." It was almost a voice. I closed my eyes and said a short prayer, asking God to guide me, even though I didn't know where to go. The following days were a mixture of searching and silence. I walked through parks, alleys, markets, anywhere someone homeless might be. I asked, I looked, I waited. Nothing. Until, one rainy afternoon, as I was crossing the Colfax Avenue overpass, I saw him. Wet, shivering, holding a paper bag. My heart almost stopped. He seemed even thinner, more frail. But when he looked up, I felt a shock. There were tears, but also a kind of peace. I went to him without thinking. You saved me," I said, my voice choked with emotion. He just smiled, a sad smile, as if he already knew this encounter was inevitable. "You didn't need to look for me, Mrs. Collins," he murmured. "What I did out of gratitude." Those words confused me. Gratitude? Why? He turned to leave, but I grabbed his arm. "Please, tell me who you really are." He hesitated, his eyes welling up, and simply replied, "Someone who should have stayed." That destroyed me inside. I should have stayed. It was a sentence laden with history, pain, and regret. I wanted to ask more, but he walked away slowly, disappearing into the light rain. I stood there, without an umbrella, feeling the cold wind on my face, and my soul. In the following days, I could no longer live in peace. Every corner of the house seemed to remind me of him. The old photos, the stopped clock on the wall, even the smell of coffee in the morning. Everything screamed something I didn't want to hear. There was something in the past that was still unresolved. I decided to go to the Denver Civil Registry office. I asked for help locating people named Thomas, who had been registered in that region more than 20 years ago. The clerk, somewhat confused, looked at me as if she were trying to find a ghost. And, in a way, that's exactly what it was. While I waited for the files, my heart raced. I was about to reopen an old wound, one that had never healed. I remembered the day my father disappeared. I was only 48 years old, and he left saying he would be back soon. He never returned. The tears came unbidden. The man I loved most had left me without explanation. And now, suddenly, a stranger knew my name, asked for forgiveness, and disappeared into the rain. It couldn't be a coincidence. It wasn't. The records finally arrived. And there it was, Thomas Collins, officially missing for 20 years. My stomach churned. I couldn't breathe properly. The scar, the gaze, the trembling voice, it all made sense now. But why? Why was he on the streets? I got in the car and drove aimlessly. I passed the same places we used to walk when I was a girl. Lake Sloan, the old movie theater on the corner, the wooden bench in front of the church. Everything seemed to scream memories. And, for the first time in a long time, I let them come. I remembered the sound of his laughter, the stories he told about faith and hope, the simple advice that seemed to solve everything. He always said, "Forgiveness is the hardest path, but the only one that sets you free." I hated him for leaving, but at that moment, I realized that maybe I needed to forgive him to truly be free. I went back to the overpass the next day. It was raining again, as if the sky remembered too. I walked slowly, looking around, my heart pounding. And there he was again, sitting in the same corner, wrapped in an old blanket. When he saw me, he tried to stand up, but he stumbled. I ran and grabbed him by the shoulders. "Please, don't go away again," I begged. He looked at me with a mixture of astonishment and pain. "Margaret, you don't understand." And that's when I realized he really knew who I was. His voice trembled, and his eyes filled with tears. "I can't be near you. It's dangerous. Not for me. For you." I stared at him, uncomprehending. He took a deep breath, and in that instant, I saw the fear, a fear that wasn't just of poverty or rejection, but of a dark past about to be revealed. "Dangerous? What are you talking about?" I asked. He just whispered, "There are things you don't know, things that can hurt you." And he turned his face away, trying to hide his tears. But I wasn't going to let him get away with it again. "You owe me the truth, Thomas. Whoever you are, tell me why you know me, why you saved me." He hesitated, and then something changed in his gaze, as if he had given up fighting against fate. "Margaret," he said slowly, "I know you because it's me. I'm the man who left you 20 years ago. I'm your father." The world seemed to stop. The sound of the rain disappeared. I felt the ground vanish beneath my feet. He, the man I had humiliated, whom I had treated like no one else, was my father. That was the moment when the past and the present collided cruelly. My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, and at the same time, an old flame of love reignited, painful and confusing. I could only manage to say one thing, my voice trembling, "Why?" And he simply replied, "Because love sometimes demands a sacrifice that the world doesn't understand." That's how the hardest part of my life began, and the most revealing one, too. I stood there, staring at him, as if time had frozen. The rain fell, running down his face, mingling with his tears. The man I had scorned in the middle of the street was the same man who had taught me to take my first steps. The truth was so absurd that my heart refused to believe it. I felt a strange mixture of anger, longing, and love. "You lied to me my whole life," I whispered. He didn't answer. He just lowered his head, ashamed. The silence between us was deafening, as if 20 years of absence were screaming without any sound. My body trembled. "Why, Dad? Why did you leave me?" He took a deep breath, but before he could answer, a sharp cough cut him off. The cold, the rain, the years on the streets, it all seemed to have taken too high a toll. I ran to the car and took him with me, thinking of nothing but saving him. The drive to the hospital seemed endless. He collapsed in the passenger seat, and I held his hand, pleading, "Stay with me, please." It was a kind of desperation I'd never felt before, as if every second was a stolen chance for reconciliation. Upon arrival, the doctors rushed him away. I stood in the hallway, soaked, my heart racing. All I wanted was to hear an explanation, anything to justify 20 years of silence. But fate seemed determined to test me once more. The hours passed. The clock on the wall marked each minute like torture. I prayed, begging God not to take him before giving me answers. It was strange. After so long feeling hatred, there I was, pleading for the life of the man I thought was dead. Finally, a doctor appeared. "He's weak, but stable. Do you want to see him?" I nodded immediately. I entered the room slowly, like one treads into a sanctuary. He lay there, pale, surrounded by tubes and machines. That man seemed frail, small, nothing like the strong father I remembered. I approached and held his hand. His fingers still had the same shape as before, thick and firm, but now they trembled. He slowly opened his eyes. "Margaret, you came." That simple sentence shattered everything inside me. I cried silently, unable to respond. "You need to rest, Dad." It was the first time in 20 years I'd called him that. He tried to smile, but the pain seemed stronger. "It's not time to rest yet. I need to tell you everything," he said, his voice weak. "But first, I need you to forgive me." That word, forgiveness, seemed to echo throughout the room. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. "How can I forgive someone who destroyed my life?" I asked, unable to hold back my tears. He turned his face away, and a tear fell onto the pillow. Because sometimes, love hides behind pain. We remained silent for long minutes. The sound of the machines was the only sign that time was still passing. Then he murmured something almost inaudible. "The truth isn't what you think, daughter. Everything I did to protect you." Before I could ask what he was talking about, a nurse came in and asked me to leave. "He needs rest." I left, but with a broken heart. What did he mean by protect you? From whom? Or from what? I went home that night with my mind racing. I remembered the note he had left. "Forgive me, Margaret." Now those words had a different weight. Perhaps he wasn't asking for forgiveness for leaving her, but for something much bigger, something I didn't yet know. The next day, the hospital called early. The operator's voice was urgent. "Mrs. Collins, your father has relapsed." I dropped everything and ran. On the way, memories came in flashes. The day he disappeared, the last hug, the smell of tobacco on his old coat. I prayed non-stop. When I arrived, the doctors were surrounding the bed. He stopped breathing for a few minutes, but we managed to resuscitate him. My heart nearly leaped out of my chest. I ran to him, and this time he looked at me with eyes full of fear and tenderness. "Daughter, don't let them take me." "Take who, Dad? What are you talking about?" I asked, desperate. He held my hand tightly. "There are dangerous people. They're still out there." And then, his voice almost fading, he added, "It wasn't my fault, Margaret. I just wanted to protect you." Tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. "Protect me from whom, Dad?" He just shook his head, exhausted. "You need to believe me. It's not safe yet." That sentence sent a chill down my spine. Who was he afraid of after all these years? When the doctors asked me to leave again, I hesitated. But he looked me in the eyes and said, "Trust in God, daughter. He will show you the way." And then he closed his eyes, exhausted. I went to the hospital chapel. I knelt down, crying like a child. I asked God to give me strength to understand, not to harden my heart. In the silence of that room, I felt a strange peace. It was as if God himself were telling me, "The truth will come, but you need to be ready." In the following days, I visited my father every day. He improved little by little, but his gaze remained distant. Sometimes he seemed to hear voices or see things that weren't there. Something about him had changed profoundly, as if he were carrying an invisible burden. One afternoon, I took a Bible and began to read to him. When I got to Psalm 23, he held my hand and whispered, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death," his voice faltered, but his eyes shone. It was faith, a wounded faith, but a living one. After a few days, the doctor said he could be discharged soon. I knew what I needed to do. "Dad, you're coming with me. You can't go back to the streets." He tried to refuse, saying he didn't deserve it. But I insisted. "You saved me. Now it's my turn." He agreed, with tears in his eyes. "I don't know if it's a good idea." "Trust me," I replied, smiling. He looked out the window and murmured, "Maybe it's time to face what's behind us." When we left the hospital, the cold wind hit his face, and he took a deep breath, as if coming back to life. "It's been so long since I smelled freedom," he said softly. I supported him by the arm and took him to the car. On the way to my house, the silence between us was heavy. There was so much to be said, so much to be explained. But I knew the time to listen would come, and that perhaps, when he began to speak, my life would never be the same again. Upon entering the house, he looked around as if revisiting an old dream. He touched the furniture, the curtains, the photos on the wall. When he saw the photo of our family, before everything fell apart, tears streamed down his face. "You've grown up so beautiful, daughter." I smiled, my heart breaking. "And you've aged so much, Dad." He chuckled softly, but his eyes were brimming with tears. Life on the streets isn't kind to anyone. That night, while he slept in the guest room, I stayed awake, gazing out the window. The moon illuminated the room, and my heart pounded. Something told me that this was only the first page of a much darker story. I had no idea what I was about to discover. But what would come next would change everything I believed about my father, and about the past I thought I had buried. That morning, the house seemed different. The same smell of coffee, the same rug in the living room, but something in the air had changed. Perhaps it was his presence, sitting there, silent, as if time had gone back 20 years. I watched him in silence, trying to understand how the man who abandoned me could seem so broken. He gazed out the window, his eyes lost in thought, as if searching for memories on the horizon. "Remember the swing in the backyard?" he asked suddenly. I was surprised. It had been decades since anyone had mentioned that old wooden swing. "I built it myself for you," I said with a fragile smile. His words pierced my heart. That smile was the same one from my childhood, the same one I saw every time he called me my treasure. I wanted to hate him, I wanted to scream. But instead, all I could do was ask, "Why did you leave, Dad?" He took a deep breath and fell silent. His hands trembled, and his gaze drifted to the floor. "It's not easy to tell," he murmured. "But you deserve to know." I stood there, waiting. He continued, "That night, when everything happened, I had no choice." "What night?" I asked, confused. He didn't answer. Tension filled the air. The clock on the wall ticked away each second with a dry sound, as if counting the time that had separated us. I could feel the fear in his eyes, a fear I didn't recognize. Suddenly, he stood up, stumbling to the bookshelf. He picked up an old, dusty picture frame containing a photo of our family. "It all started here," he whispered. "Before the pain, before the lies." I approached, and he turned the picture over. On the back, there was a handwritten dedication. "To the bravest man I ever knew, with love, Ellen." I froze. Ellen was my mother. But that handwriting, it wasn't hers. "Who wrote this?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just closed his eyes, and a tear rolled down his face. It was at that moment that I realized there was much more to that story than I had imagined. "Dad, you need to trust me. Tell me everything." He shook his head. "If I tell you, you'll hate me even more." "Impossible," I said. "I've been through this." He took a deep breath, sat up, and stared at me. "There was a man, someone very close. He accused me of something terrible. Something I didn't do. My stomach churned. Ellen believed him? I asked. He nodded, his gaze lost in thought. Yes. And that's why I ran away. The tears came before I could even hold them back. My mother always told me that he left us. That he woke up one day and simply disappeared. I lived with that version for 20 years. Why didn't you try to defend yourself? I asked. He replied, his voice breaking, because if I stayed, you would be in danger. Those words pierced me like lightning. Danger? I was just a child. He nodded. Exactly for that reason. They knew that if they couldn't get me, they would use you. I shuddered. Who are they? They, Dad. He looked out the window, as if afraid of being overheard. The wrong people. Silence filled the room. The distant sound of the wind seemed the only sign of life. You've been living in hiding all this time? I asked. Yes. But even so, I always followed you from afar. I saw you grow up, I saw when you got married, when you lost your mother. My voice faltered. Were you at her funeral? He closed his eyes. Behind the trees. I couldn't get close. I cried, and so did he. That love, mutilated by time, was still there, hidden beneath the scars. For days, he remained silent. He seemed to hide within his own mind, between memories and regrets. Sometimes, he would wake in the middle of the night, sweating profusely, calling out names I didn't recognize. Who is Richard? I asked one morning. He paled. Don't say that name, Margaret. Why? I insisted. He looked away. Because he was the reason for everything. My heart raced. Richard was Dad's best friend, the man I called Uncle when I was little. What did he do? He remained silent for long seconds, until finally saying, He framed me. He said I had stolen money from the company where we worked. His mother believed him. The police came, and I ran away. I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. You didn't steal anything? He looked straight into my eyes. Never. I was loyal to the end. But when I realized Richard was getting too close to your mother, I understood there was something behind it. My whole body went cold. Are you saying that he wanted Mom? Dad nodded. And he got her. When I ran away, he became the hero who comforted her. Tears began to fall uncontrollably. The pain of betrayal felt old, but still vivid. That revelation left me in shock. My mother, the man I admired, the lie that shaped my childhood, it all crumbled before me. Why didn't you ever come back to clear your name? I asked, between sobs. Because they would have used you to destroy me. The following hours passed slowly. I felt like I was floating in a sea of confused memories. Each photo on the wall seemed to look at me with secrets. Dad went to bed early, exhausted, and I stayed awake, staring at the family portrait. That perfect smile hid so much. The next morning, I found Dad sitting on the porch, reading the same old Bible they'd mentioned at the shelter. He was reading softly, his lips moving slowly. What are you reading? I asked. The book of Job, he replied. About a man who lost everything and yet didn't give up on God. I sat beside him in silence. The cold wind rustled through the leaves, and for a moment, peace reigned. Do you believe God still has a purpose for me? He asked. Yes, I replied without hesitation. Because, somehow, he brought you back. He smiled, and in that smile there was gratitude and pain. I want to believe that too. We stayed there for a while, saying nothing. But I knew his silence hid something even bigger, something he didn't yet have the courage to tell me. Late in the afternoon, while I was preparing dinner, I heard a noise in the bedroom. I ran over and found Dad rummaging through the old suitcase he'd brought from the shelter. Inside were yellowed papers, old letters, and a torn photograph. I picked up the photo and froze. It was my mother, next to Richard. The ground seemed to spin. He tried to snatch the photo from my hands, but I held on tight. Did you know about this? I asked, my voice choked with emotion. He lowered his head. Yes. I knew the day I ran away. Tears came uncontrollably. So it was all true. She chose him. He replied, she was deceived, daughter. and she paid a high price for it. I stood there, looking at that face I loved so much, no longer knowing who was the victim and who was the culprit. The only certainty was that the story wasn't over yet, and that the past was about to knock on our door once more. Because, that same night, someone rang the doorbell, and the sound echoed through the house like an omen. When the doorbell rang, the sound echoed throughout the house like thunder. Dad was sitting in the living room, staring at the floor, and seemed to freeze. His gaze tightened, as if he recognized the sound. "Don't open it," he said softly, almost in a whisper. But it was too late. I was already heading towards the door. I carefully tightened the grip on the doorknob. On the other side, a tall, well-dressed man in a dark hat watched me silently. "Good evening, Mrs. Collins. I'm Detective O'Connor. I'm looking for Thomas Collins." My heart stopped. His name still sounded dangerous. "Why are you looking for my father?" I asked, trying to sound calm. The detective looked inside the house. "We have some old issues that need to be resolved." Before I could answer, Dad stood up slowly, leaning on his cane. "The time for those issues is over, Connor." The tension between the two was palpable. The detective took a deep breath. "So it's true. I thought you were already dead." Dad gave a half-smile, without humor. "I almost was many times. I watched everything without understanding." That man spoke to my father as if he knew the shadows of the past well. "Mrs. Collins," the detective said, turning to me, 20 years ago, your father fled an embezzlement charge. The case was closed for lack of evidence, but there is new information. And a body has been found." My stomach churned. "A body?" I repeated, breathless. Dad stood motionless. The detective continued, "We think it might be related to the disappearance of Mr. Richard Hayes." The name made the air leave the room. Dad closed his eyes, as if he had been expecting it. "What do you think I did?" he asked in a hoarse voice. "I don't know, Thomas. But the body was found near the old office where you used to work. And someone said you were seen there that night." The silence that followed was suffocating. My heart was pounding. "This is absurd. He's innocent." The detective looked at me with empathy, but firmly. "I hope so, ma'am. But perhaps not even his own father told you everything." Those words hurt me in a strange way. The detective left, but the storm remained. I closed the door slowly and turned to him. "Dad, please tell me it's not true." He took a deep breath. "Margaret, do you believe me?" "I want to believe," I replied. "But it's all scaring me." He walked to the window and looked at the rain. "There are things I can't change, but I can tell you what really happened that night." I sat down, my heart racing. He began slowly. "Richard called me to his office. He said he needed to talk about the company. I went. And it was the worst decision of my life." The memories seemed to cut off as he spoke. When I arrived, he was drunk, with a gun on the table. He said he'd discovered something between me and his mother. I swore it was a lie, that she was innocent. But he wouldn't listen. Dad paused for a moment, as if the words hurt him. "He attacked me. There was a struggle. The gun went off. When I realized what was happening, he was on the ground, and I was covered in blood." My eyes filled with tears. My God! I panicked. I ran away. I knew no one would believe me, especially your mother. She thought I was to blame. And the rest, you already know. He fell silent, and the sound of the rain filled the silence. I didn't know what to think. Was my father a murderer? Or just a man destroyed by tragedy? "Dad, did you kill Richard?" He looked at me, and in that look there was something that chilled me, a mixture of guilt and pain. "I never knew, daughter. I ran away before I was sure." That answer disarmed me. He stood up, walked to the window, and rested his forehead against the glass. "I've spent 20 years running not only from the police, but from the truth." I stood there, watching the man who was once my hero crumble before my eyes. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" I asked. He turned, his eyes welling with tears. "Because I thought it was better for you to hate me than to know that your father could be a murderer." His pain was so real that I wanted to hug him, but doubt still held me back. And the body? How could they have found it only now? He shook his head. Because maybe he never died. That sent shivers down my spine. What do you mean? Dad took a deep breath. Richard was a dangerous man. If he survived, he might be the one who's been chasing me all these years. And what if he's the one who sent the detective here? The house fell into absolute silence. The wind outside battered against the windows, and a clap of thunder made the ground tremble. I felt like a child again, afraid of the dark, of what I couldn't see. "Do you think he's still alive?" I asked. Dad replied in a firm voice, "I'm sure of it." I spent the night awake. With every noise in the house, my heart raced. I thought about everything he told me, the struggle, the escape, the guilt. And, deep down, a question gnawed at me. What if my father was hiding something darker than I imagined? In the morning, he wasn't in bed. The blanket was thrown on the floor, the window was ajar. I ran through the house, calling for him, but silence was my only answer. On the kitchen table, there was only a letter. I picked it up with trembling hands. It was his handwriting. "If I don't come back, don't look for me. There are truths that need to stay buried." My heart raced. Don't look for me? After everything? That letter felt like another abandonment. But this time, not out of cowardice. It was as if he wanted to protect me from something that was about to happen. Something too big to bear. I looked out the window. The wind was blowing strongly, lifting the dry leaves from the sidewalk. The world seemed too calm for so much fear. And it was in that silence that I heard the sound of footsteps outside. I ran to the door. When I opened it, the same detective was there, but there was something different in his gaze. "Mrs. Collins," he said, his voice deep, "we need to talk. About your father, and about the body. There's something you need to know." My heart nearly stopped. He hesitated before saying, "The body, it's not Richard's." For a moment, the world spun. The air vanished. If it wasn't Richard, then who was dead? And what did that mean in relation to everything my father had told me? I would soon find out the answer. But at that moment, I could only think of one thing. My father was running away from something, or someone, who was still alive. And that truth was about to find me. Detective O'Connor looked at me with a serious, almost sorrowful expression. I was still holding the door, trying to understand what he had just said. "What do you mean, the body isn't Richard's?" I asked, feeling the ground disappear beneath my feet. He took a deep breath before answering. "The body is someone else's, and has been identified as someone named Samuel Reed." That name meant nothing to me, but the detective's look made me understand it was important. "Who is Samuel Reed?" I asked. He hesitated. "A former employee of the same company where your father worked. He disappeared around the same time as Richard." I felt my heart race. "And what does that have to do with my father?" O'Connor lowered his eyes. "The last person seen with Samuel was Thomas Collins." The words cut through the air like a blade. I shook my head in disbelief. "That's impossible. My father could barely take care of himself on the streets." The detective approached. "The truth is, nobody knows what really happened that night. There are missing pieces." My whole body trembled. "And Richard, is he still missing?" He nodded. "Yes. But there are indications that he's alive, and may have assumed another identity." My stomach churned. "Another identity?" I repeated, feeling my voice trail off. "What if he's here, in Denver?" The detective observed me silently for a moment. "You need to be careful. If your father is telling the truth, and Richard really is alive, then there's someone dangerous nearby." Those words kept hammering in my head. I looked out the window and had the strange feeling of being watched. After he left, I sat on the sofa and remained silent for long minutes. The house seemed colder, darker. I picked up the letter my father had left and read it again. "If I don't come back, don't look for me." It was more than a goodbye, it was a warning. I decided to ignore my fear. If there was something he wanted to hide, I needed to find out. I spent the whole day rummaging through the suitcase he'd brought from the shelter. Among the worn clothes and old papers, I found an envelope folded several times. Inside, a faded photograph. It was a black and white picture. Dad, Richard, and another man, the same one the detective had called Samuel. On the back of the photo, it was handwritten, Denver, 1997, the beginning and the end. My heart raced. What kind of secret began and ended in the same place? As I looked at the photo, I noticed something strange. An almost imperceptible detail, the ring on Richard's hand. It was the same ring my mother wore when she got married. That ring should never have been on his hand. My whole body went cold. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but in a way that only confused me more. What if my mother had discovered the truth? What if the whole story, the crime, the disappearance, the accusation, had been staged from the beginning? I couldn't sleep that night. Every noise in the house made me shudder. Memories came back like distant echoes, the smell of Mom's perfume, the sound of Dad's laughter, the muffled arguments behind closed doors. It was as if the past were alive, knocking on my door again. The next morning, I heard soft tapping on the kitchen window. I ran to it, and almost dropped my cup. Dad was out there, soaked, his face pale, his eyes desperate. I jumped open the door. "Dad, where have you been?" He came in breathless, looking around as if fleeing from something invisible. "Margaret, they know where I am." The panic in his voice chilled me. "Who knows?" I asked, grabbing his arm. "Those who have hunted me all these years," he replied, almost breathless. Before I could say anything, he pulled a small envelope from his pocket and placed it in my hands. "Keep this safe, but don't open it until I tell you to." I looked at him, confused. "What's inside?" He just murmured, "Proof." That word sounded heavy. Proof of what? He took a deep breath. Of who really destroyed our lives. I was speechless. I wanted to open the envelope right there, but his gaze made me stop. "If you open it now, you'll put yourself in danger," he warned. His fear was real, almost palpable. "Dad, the detective was here. He said the body isn't Richard's." He closed his eyes. "Then it's worse than I imagined." "Why?" I asked. He answered in a trembling voice, "Because if it's not Richard, then he's alive and coming after me." I froze. The idea of Richard alive, moving in the shadows, was terrifying. "But why? What does he want from you after all this time?" Dad approached, his eyes filled with guilt. "What he always wanted, power. And revenge." That word echoed through the house. Revenge. He sat down on the sofa, exhausted. "I spent 2 decades running, Margaret, thinking I was hiding from a crime I didn't commit. But now I understand. I was running from a man who can't stand to lose." I knelt beside him. "And what can I do to help?" He held my hands tightly. "Pray for me, daughter. And trust in God. Only He can stop the evil that is coming." Tears came uncontrollably. "Father, I won't let them take you." He looked at me tenderly. "You always had your mother's heart. Strong, but full of compassion." He smiled, and for a moment the house seemed lighter. But that instant was short-lived. A noise outside made us freeze. The sound of a car stopping in front of the house. Headlights cutting through the darkness. Dad suddenly stood up, pale. "They found me." I ran to the window, but I didn't see anyone. Fear gripped me. "Dad, who are they?" He grabbed my arm and led me into the hallway. "Take the envelope and go to your room. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone." I didn't want to leave him, but the urgency in his eyes was undeniable. "And you?" I asked. He simply replied, "I'll try to buy some time." I did what he told me. I ran to my room, the envelope pressed against my chest. The sound of footsteps echoed outside. Someone was in the house. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Then I heard a muffled cry, his voice. I ran outside before I could even think. The room was empty. The back door was open, the wind rustling the curtains. I shouted his name, but only silence answered. The only thing I found was his Bible lying on the floor, open to a marked page. It was Psalm 91. The words seemed to glow in the dim light. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I gripped the book tightly as tears streamed down my face. I knew God was there, but fear overwhelmed me. My father had disappeared again. This time, however, something told me he wasn't running away. He was being taken away. I stood in the room, staring at the open back door, the wind billowing in like a whisper of fate. My father had disappeared once again, and the fear I felt wasn't just of losing him, it was of never knowing the truth again. The sound of the rain hitting the windows seemed like God's own clock, marking the hour when everything would change. I ran outside, barefoot, shouting his name down the dark street. No one answered. Only the echo of my own voice returned. The streetlights flickered as if the world were holding its breath. And then, among the shadows, something on the ground gleamed. It was the necklace he had worn since I was a child, a small silver crucifix. I picked it up with trembling hands, the metal still warm. My heart tightened. "Lord, show me where he is," I murmured. But the sky remained silent. I went back inside, trying to think. The envelope was still with me, untouched. I sat on the floor, holding it as if it were the last thread connecting me to him. I remembered the words, "Don't open it until I tell you to." But what if he could never be in charge again? Curiosity burned like a flame inside me. I grabbed a pair of scissors and started cutting the edge of the envelope. My hands were shaking so much I almost dropped it. When I finally opened it, there was only a photograph and a yellowed piece of paper. The photo showed my mother, embracing Detective O'Connor. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake. But her face was unmistakable, and so was his gaze. On the back, a date, October 1997, the same month my father disappeared. The ground seemed to spin. O'Connor, the man who claimed to be investigating the truth, had been part of the lie all along. I picked up the piece of paper that was with it. It was a letter, written in my father's shaky handwriting. "If you're reading this, it's because he's back. Don't trust O'Connor. He was Richard's man." My blood ran cold. I ran to the phone and dialed his number. The line rang 3 times before he answered. "Mrs. Collins, is everything all right?" His voice sounded too calm. "O'Connor, my father is gone. Someone took him. Calm down, calm down. I'm on my way." I hung up and stood there, trembling, with the crucifix in one hand and the letter in the other. I no longer knew who to believe. Minutes later, the sound of tires in the driveway announced his arrival. I ran to the window and saw the same black car as before. He entered the house with a worried expression. What happened? I was trembling. My father disappeared. And I found this. I handed him the photo. He looked at it, and for a second, I saw something dark in his gaze. "Where did you find this?" he asked. "In his suitcase." O'Connor fell silent. "Mrs. Collins, there are things your father hasn't told you. He's not the victim you think he is." I felt my throat tighten. "And you are," I cried. He sighed, taking off his hat. "Richard didn't die, Margaret. He's alive. And the name he uses now is Thomas Collins." The world collapsed. "You're saying that the man who lived with me these past few days isn't my father?" He nodded coldly. "Richard assumed his identity years ago, after the fight. The real Thomas died that night." That revelation hit me like a blade. "No, that's impossible." He opened the folder and took out a document. The body we found was Thomas's. His real father. Richard has lived under his name ever since. My legs went weak. "But he knew everything about me, about our life," O'Connor replied with frightening calm. "He watched you all these years. He knew how to convince you." Tears began to fall, but a doubt gnawed at me. Why would he have saved me if he was the guilty one? "It doesn't make sense," I murmured. "If he's Richard, why would he risk his life to protect me?" O'Connor looked at the floor. "Because he loved you. His mind was shattered after the accident. He believed he was your father." That sentence struck me deeply. He believed he was my father. A mixture of disgust and compassion overwhelmed me. "My God!" I whispered. "I humiliated him, took him home, and I couldn't finish. O'Connor placed his hand on my shoulder. We need to find him before he hurts himself or someone else. I took a step back, suspicious. What if you're the liar, O'Connor? He frowned. If I wanted to hurt you, I would have already done it. Even so, something in his gaze made me uncomfortable. It was the same look from the photo. Cold, calculating. And then I noticed something, the ring. The same ring from the old photograph, my mother's wedding ring. He was still wearing it. My whole body froze. Where did you get that ring? I asked. He smiled slightly. Ah, so you figured it out. The silence that followed was terrifying. Your mother and I were closer than you think, Margaret. She knew what your father had done. I took a step back. You're lying. He approached slowly. No. She wanted to protect you. And the man who pretended to be your father destroyed everything. His voice was lower, almost a whisper. But now, everything can be fixed. My heart raced. His expression was no longer that of a detective, it was that of someone obsessed. Where's Richard? I asked, trying to stay calm. He smiled. Close. Much closer than you think. At that moment, I heard a noise coming from the hallway. A groan, faint but recognizable. Dad. The voice escaped before I could control it. O'Connor turned, tense. I ran toward the sound. The basement door was ajar. I ran down the stairs, and what I saw took my breath away. He, the man I called father, was there, tied up, wounded, but alive. When he saw me, he whispered weakly, "Margaret, he's lying." Before I could react, I heard footsteps behind me. O'Connor. The gun in his hands gleamed in the dim light. "Now you understand, Margaret," he said with a grim smile. "Not everything is as it seems." I shook the wounded man's hand, trying to think quickly. O'Connor approached slowly, his gun pointed. "Who are you going to believe? The man who deceived you for 20 years, or me, who can show you the truth?" The silence was deadly. My heart pounded like a drum. And then, the man on the floor, who I believed to be my father, looked into my eyes and said something I will never forget. "If I were him, I would have let you die." Time seemed to stand still. Those words echoed inside me like thunder. What did he mean? And for the first time, I realized that perhaps neither of them was telling the truth. For a moment, I stood completely still. The sound of his voice, hoarse, weak, but firm, echoed in my head like a riddle. "If I were him, I would have let you die." What did that mean? Was he not who I thought he was, or was he just trying to confuse me? O'Connor kept his gun pointed at me, and I could hear his rapid breathing behind me. "Margaret, get away from him. He's playing with your mind." I turned my face slowly. "And you, O'Connor? What are you doing to me?" He narrowed his eyes. "I'm trying to save you." The short laugh that escaped my lips sounded bitter. "Save? You lied to me from the start. You said you were a detective, but you were my mother's lover." He hesitated. "I loved her, more than he ever loved." I looked again at the man lying on the ground. He was trying to free himself from his bonds, his face smeared with blood. "Margaret, don't listen to him," he whispered. "Everything he said is to distract you from the truth." I knelt beside him, trying to free him. "And what is the truth, then?" He looked at me with such profound sadness that it made me shudder. "That Richard never died. But that I was never him." My hands froze. "Are you saying you're my father?" He closed his eyes. "I'm the man who loved you enough to disappear, daughter. But he is the man who destroyed everything." O'Connor laughed, a cold, soulless laugh. "Lies. He's always lived on lies. Do you really think a beggar is capable of fooling the system, running away for decades, and still passing himself off as someone else?" His gaze was that of someone who thought he possessed the absolute truth. "Then why are you armed, O'Connor?" I asked, standing up. "Detectives don't threaten witnesses, do they?" He hesitated for a moment, and that moment was enough. I ran toward the closet and pulled out the old emergency flashlight. I pointed the light directly into his eyes. He recoiled, blinded, and at that moment the man on the ground managed to partially free himself. "Run, Margaret!" he shouted. I didn't think. I ran up the stairs, my heart racing, while the sounds of his footsteps echoed behind me. The house seemed alive, the floorboards creaking as if warning that danger was near. I went into the kitchen, tripped, and fell. The envelope, the letter, the photo, everything scattered on the floor. I picked up the crucifix and pressed it against my chest. God, show me who is lying. I heard the sound of the door opening. O'Connor slowly climbed up, gun in hand. "Margaret, don't make this any harder. I just want to protect you." "Protect me from what?" I yelled. "From the man pretending to be your father," he replied. But there was something in his voice, something broken, almost human. "Why should I trust you?" I asked. He stopped halfway up the stairs. "Because your mother trusted you, and died for it." The words hit me like a punch. "What did you say?" He took a deep breath. "She found out everything. She tried to tell the truth. But the man you call your father stopped her." I shook my head. "No, it's not possible." "Ask him," he said, and pointed to the basement. At that moment, the man who had been tied up appeared in the doorway, leaning against the wall, his face bloody but alive. "Liars! All of them!" His voice echoed through the house. O'Connor raised his weapon. "Don't take another step." The man stepped forward, staggering. "You killed Ellen, and now you want to kill her daughter." O'Connor shouted. "She killed herself, because she couldn't bear to live with the guilt." The air in the room grew heavy, dense. "What was it all for?" I asked, crying. O'Connor shouted, "For loving two men at the same time." The silence that followed was absolute. I felt my heart shatter. "This can't be true." "Mom never—" The wounded man tried to approach. "Don't listen to him, Margaret. Your mother was deceived. He used her, manipulated her, destroyed our family." The gun trembled in O'Connor's hands. "He killed his mother. And he wants to blame me. He's the killer, not me." The two men, two pasts, two truths, stood before me, and I was caught in the middle, unsure who to believe. "Enough!" I screamed, through tears. "They're both lying. They both destroyed everything." The light flickered, and a thunderclap ripped across the sky. O'Connor turned his face away for a second, and the man took the opportunity to shove him. The gun fell to the ground. I ran to grab it, but hesitated. I couldn't decide what to do. "Margaret, give me that gun!" the wounded man shouted. "Don't listen to him!" O'Connor yelled. My fingers were trembling so much I almost dropped it. "Who's telling the truth?" I yelled. No one answered. They were both panting, looking at me as if I were the final judgment. And, for a moment, I realized something. The necklace O'Connor was wearing, it wasn't the same ring from the photo. It was my father's crucifix. I looked at him, horrified. This necklace, it belonged to my father. He seemed to realize his mistake and tried to explain, but it was too late. "You lied about everything," I yelled. He lunged forward. "Margaret, listen." The shot rang out before I could think. The sound echoed through the house like the end of a nightmare. O'Connor's body fell to the floor, and silence fell. I stood there, still holding the gun, unable to breathe. The wounded man approached slowly. "You did what you had to do." Tears streamed down my face. "I killed him." He placed his hand on my shoulder. Sometimes, God uses despair to reveal the truth. But the truth was still far away. Because when I looked at him, I saw blood running down his arm, and, hanging around his neck, the same wedding ring my mother used to wear. My heart froze. "Where did you get this?" I asked, my voice trembling. He looked away. "You weren't supposed to see this." I took a step back. "Dad, or whoever you are, what are you hiding from me?" He didn't answer. He simply said, in a voice I had never heard before, "The story isn't over yet." And it was at that moment that I heard the sirens approaching. The sirens drew closer, cutting through the silence of the early morning. I still held the gun, my hands covered in sweat and trembling uncontrollably. O'Connor's body lay motionless on the ground, and the man I called father, or thought I called father, watched me with a look that mixed pity and regret. "Margaret, listen to me. We need to get out of here." His voice sounded too calm, almost rehearsed. "No. You're going to tell me who you are," I shouted, my voice trembling. He took a step toward me, and I pointed the gun. "Stay where you are." The sound of sirens grew closer and closer. He stopped, took a deep breath, and said, "Everything I did was to protect you. But now, if we stay, you'll pay for something you didn't do." Those words seemed to echo, but I no longer knew if I could trust them. The police parked in front of the house. Red and blue lights illuminated the windows, like blinking ghosts. "Margaret Collins," a male voice shouted from outside. "Drop the weapon and come out with your hands visible." I looked at him, desperate. "Tell the truth now, or I'll turn you in." He smiled, a weak, sad smile. "If you do that, they'll take the wrong man. Just like they did the first time." Confusion completely overwhelmed me. Before I could react, he pulled something from his pocket, a new, sealed envelope. "This answers everything." "What is it?" I asked. "The proof they've wanted for 20 years. The one Richard hid." The police started knocking on the door. "Mrs. Collins, open up immediately." He placed the envelope in my hands and said urgently, "If you love me, trust me. Only open it when I tell you to." "Again with this game?" I shouted. But he was already turning towards the back door. "Dad, please don't run away again." He paused for a moment, looked at me, and said, "I'm not running away. I'm setting you free." And he disappeared into the darkness of the night, seconds before the police broke down the door. The officers found me kneeling on the floor, in shock. "Mrs. Collins, what happened here?" I could only manage to say, "I don't know who my father is anymore." They pulled me away from O'Connor's body and began searching the house. While they interrogated me, the questions seemed to echo in a tunnel. "Did he threaten you? Did you shoot in self-defense?" I could barely answer. The image of the necklace, the ring, the letter, swirled in my head like an endless nightmare. At the police station, I sat there for hours, barely able to say anything. Until a police officer came in with a different look, like someone bringing news that changes everything. "Mrs. Collins, we found something in the house." He placed an old, somewhat rusty name tag on the table. "This belonged to O'Connor. But look at the real name." I looked closely and felt my heart stop. Richard Hayes. The air disappeared. "That's not possible." The policeman nodded. "It seems that the detective in question was, in fact, the man who disappeared 20 years ago." His voice faded. Everything began to spin. "So, my father was right all along?" The penny dropped. The man who deceived me, who killed my mother, who ruined our lives, was here, disguised as the savior himself. I trembled, remembering O'Connor's look before he died. He had said, "Not everything is as it seems." I was released that night, but my body felt like stone. I went back home, and every step echoed with the weight of guilt. I had killed the man who destroyed my family, but that didn't bring me peace. It only brought more questions. I sat on the floor, the new envelope in my hands. The same note, "Open it only when I tell you to." But I no longer had the patience to wait. I tore off the seal with trembling hands. Inside was a handwritten confession. The paper smelled of mildew and tears. "Margaret, if you're reading this, then the truth has come out. The man who impersonated O'Connor was Richard. He destroyed my life, your mother's, and almost destroyed yours. But God gave me time to fix things." Tears began to fall. "I never wanted you to see me as a monster. I ran away to protect you. I hid, I went hungry, I lost everything, except my faith. And it was faith that kept me alive until now." I continued reading, my heart in pieces. "If you doubt me, look inside the black box I left under the porch floorboards. It's all there, the contract, the evidence, the recording. Richard orchestrated everything. He killed Samuel Reed and framed me." I ran out onto the balcony with a flashlight. The cold wind stung my face, but I didn't care. I knelt on the ground and began to lift the planks. There it was, a small, rusty box, locked with an old padlock. I picked up the key he had left with the crucifix days before. It fit perfectly. Inside, I found old tapes, photos, and a small diary. In the photos were my mother and Richard, but also receipts, blackmail letters, and a document signed with the name O'Connor Hayes. Each page of the diary was a revelation. Richard used the guise of a detective to erase traces, rewrite his own history, and destroy any chance of forgiveness. My father had tried to warn me, but no one wanted to listen. Tears blinded me. I closed the diary and looked at the sky. God, I doubted my own father. Guilt tore me apart, but along with it came something new, gratitude. Because even hurt, he never stopped loving me. In the midst of that confusion of faith and pain, I heard a noise coming from the backyard. Slow, dragging footsteps. I ran to the door, my heart racing. And there he was, covered in mud, exhausted, but alive. "Dad!" I yelled, running to him. He hugged me tightly, trembling. "Is it over?" I asked through tears. He took a deep breath. "Almost." I stepped back a little. "What do you mean, almost?" He looked at me with the saddest look I'd ever seen. "Because there's someone who still needs to know the truth, and that someone is you." I felt the ground disappear beneath me. "What are you saying?" He cupped my face in trembling hands. "Margaret, I'm not who you think I am. Not everything I've told you is a lie, but not everything is true." My heart started racing. "Dad, who are you, anyway?" He looked up at the sky, tears streaming down his face, and said in a broken voice, "I am the man who killed Richard Hayes." For a moment, the world stopped. The wind ceased. The pain turned into absolute silence. And I realized that the truth could be even more devastating than the lie. For a moment, the sound of the wind seemed to disappear. Those words, "I am the man who killed Richard Hayes," echoed inside me like thunder. My whole body froze. "Dad, what are you saying?" He took a deep breath, his gaze lost somewhere in the distant past. "It was an accident, Margaret. A mistake that cost me my soul." He sat down slowly, exhausted, his hands covered in scars and guilt. "That night, I went to the office to end it all. I wanted to settle scores, demand the truth. But he attacked me first." I closed my eyes. I'd heard that version before, but this time there was something different, the tone of confession, the regret. I tried to defend myself. There was a gun on the table. I pushed it away, but it went off. His voice faltered with each word. The sound of the gunshot. I still hear it to this day. He looked at me, tears streaming down his face. "I thought I had killed him. That's why I ran away. I spent years in hiding, waiting for God to judge me. But then, years later, I found out he was alive." My heart tightened. "And that's when you came back." He nodded. "I needed to see with my own eyes what remained of the past. I wanted to see you, but I also needed to stop it from destroying someone else." Tears streamed down her face uncontrollably. "You saved me, and I didn't even know who you were." He smiled slightly. "Maybe it was God, not me. Sometimes He allows pain to be the path to redemption." I sat beside him, and for a moment, silence was the only refuge. "But, Father, if you killed him now, why did you come back?" He closed his eyes, tired. "Because it wasn't me who shot. It was you." The air left my lungs. "Me?" He nodded. "The bullet that took Richard's life was the same one you fired, thinking you were protecting your father." My whole body trembled. "No, that's not possible." He placed his hand on my shoulder. "It wasn't your fault. He was going to kill you. I saw it in his eyes. God used you to put an end to the evil I didn't have the courage to face." I cried, hugging the crucifix around his neck. "How can I live with this?" I asked, my voice almost silent. "By living with faith," he replied. "Forgiveness doesn't erase what we did, but it gives us the strength to move on." We remained silent for a long time, listening only to the sound of the wind and the distant echo of the sirens that still roared through the streets. It seemed like the end of everything, But inside me there was a strange peace, as if chaos had finally found rest. Suddenly, he pulled something out of his pocket. A small folded piece of paper, stained with blood. "What's this?" I asked. "Your mother's last note," he replied with a sad smile. I carefully opened the paper. "If you ever read this, know that love is stronger than mistakes. I forgive you both." The tears returned, but this time they were gentle. Those words were the cure I had waited for 20 years. "Did she know?" I asked. "She always knew," she replied. "But she chose silence because she believed that one day God would bring the truth to light." And in that instant, I realized that was exactly what was happening there. In the following days, the city seemed lighter. I was called to testify, and I told everything. The police confirmed the dead man was, in fact, Richard Hayes, and the evidence hidden in the box linked him to multiple crimes. My father's name was cleared. But human justice is never complete. What he carried inside, no court could judge. "I don't want forgiveness from the world, Margaret. I only want God's." And I replied, "He already gave it to you, Father." And so did I. His health deteriorated in the following weeks. The Denver cold was brutal, and his body could no longer endure it. I spent the nights by his bedside, holding his hand, reading the Psalms he loved so much. One quiet morning, he asked me to open the window. The sun was rising, gilding the mountains in the distance. "Look there, daughter. It's God's forgiveness illuminating everything." Tears were falling, but he smiled. "Now I can rest." That was the last thing he said. His last breath was so light it felt like a prayer. I stood there, holding his hand, feeling the presence of something greater than pain. Love, true love, doesn't die, it just changes form. Few people attended the funeral. But the sky was bluer than I had ever seen it. And, as the coffin was lowered, the wind blew strongly, carrying away with it the weight of the years, the guilt, the doubts. I left the crucifix on the coffin lid. "You came back to save me, and I only realized it when it was too late." I closed my eyes and said the same prayer he repeated every night: "Lord, deliver me from evil and teach me to forgive." Without realizing it, a slight smile blossomed on my face. For the first time, I didn't feel orphaned. He was at peace, and so was I. Months passed. The house became quiet again, but not empty. Every corner seemed heavy with his presence. Sometimes, at night, I would open the Bible and find notes in the margins, simple words like faith, hope, forgiveness. One day, while tidying the attic, I found a small box. Inside, a folded piece of paper and a photo of us, me as a child, him smiling. On the note, just one sentence: "If fear ever returns, remember that God still writes the ending." I closed my eyes and smiled. Life wasn't perfect, but it was redeemed. Because, in the end, forgiveness is not forgetting the past, it's the miracle of starting over. And in that instant I knew, my father had been right all along. God's love truly transforms even the most broken stories. You know, when I look back and think about everything I've been through, I still wonder if it was all a punishment or a miracle. And maybe it was both. Because sometimes God allows pain to break us so that we can finally be rebuilt by His own hands. My father, or the man I learned to call him, wasn't perfect. None of us are. But he taught me what true repentance is, the kind that doesn't apologize with words, but with a change of heart. He showed me that forgiveness isn't about forgetting what someone did, but about freeing oneself from the power that it has over our hearts. I lived with hatred for so long, believing it made me strong. But forgiveness, forgiveness is the most silent and powerful force in the world. It heals the unseen. It restores the peace that time has taken away. Today, every time the wind blows through the curtains of that empty house, I feel that He is still here. And, deep down, I know He is. Because when someone truly loves, they never completely leave, they just change places. And if you've made it this far, listening to me, I want to tell you something from the bottom of my heart. Don't let resentment fester inside you. There's still time to forgive, to start over, to call someone and say, "I love you," before it's too late. Have you ever been through something similar? Have you ever had to forgive someone who hurt you deeply? Or is there someone who still needs to forgive you? Think about it, because, in the end, it's not the past that defines who we are, it's what we choose to do with it. And before I finish, I want to leave you with the same blessing that my father always repeated before going to sleep. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May He fill you with peace, and may His love renew everything that fear has destroyed. If this story touched your heart, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, not just to help me, but so that more people can hear stories that heal, inspire, and remind the world that love still exists. Thank you for staying with me until the end. And remember, God still writes the most beautiful endings, even after the saddest pages.